The Calthene Imperial flagship hung in the darkness of space like a wounded animal. Its crystalline hull, normally glowing with the soft blue light of active quantum engines, sat dark and cold. Inside Orbital Station Gamma 7, the silence was broken only by the hiss of hydraulic systems and the occasional chatter of docking crews going about their work. Tom Wallace wiped his hands on his already stained work coveralls and stared at the coffee dispenser in front of him. The machine had stopped working 3 hours ago, and the station crew was getting cranky without their morning caffeine fix. He traced the problem to a stuck pressure valve, something simple that would take maybe 10 minutes to fix once he got the panel open. "Hand me the small wrench," he called out to his assistant, a young trainee named Peter who was still learning the ropes. Peter rummaged through the toolkit and passed over the tool. Tom worked the valve loose, listening to the familiar sounds of the station around him. He'd been working here for 5 years now, ever since his wife Linda got her teaching position on the colony below. It was steady work, paid the bills, and let him be home for dinner with his kids most nights. Not glamorous but honest. That's when he heard the shouting. The voice came from the main docking corridor, loud enough to echo through the maintenance bay. It was sharp, angry, and very clearly not human. Tom glanced at Peter, who shrugged nervously. Arguments weren't uncommon near the docks, but this one sounded different. More important, somehow. 28 engineers. The voice rang out again and Tom could hear footsteps now, multiple sets, moving quickly. 28 of the finest minds in the galaxy, and not one of you can tell me why my flagship won't move. Tom returned his attention to the coffee machine, but his ears stayed tuned to the conversation. He couldn't help it. 5 years of maintenance work had taught him to listen for problems, even when they weren't his responsibility. "Your Majesty, please understand," another voice responded, this one trembling with stress. "The quantum matrix has completely destabilized. The cascade failure has corrupted 17 primary subsystems and at least 40 secondary ones. We've tried every known repair protocol. The mathematics simply don't allow for a solution. The drive is beyond repair." Tom's hands paused on the coffee machine. Quantum matrix destabilized. Cascade failure. Corrupted subsystems. The words tumbled through his mind and something about them felt familiar. "I don't care about your mathematics," the first voice snapped back. "I care about results. My empire doesn't run on theory and calculations. It runs on ships that move when I tell them to move." Tom twisted the pressure valve and felt it give way. Coffee grounds and old water spilled out into the drip tray. He nodded to himself. Just like he'd thought. The pressure had nowhere to go, so it backed up into the system and shut everything down. Simple problem, simple fix. "The heat signatures are completely misaligned," the stressed voice continued from the corridor. "Every time we attempt to rebalance the quantum field, the system overcompensates and creates new failures. It's like the ship is fighting against itself." Tom froze. Heat signatures misaligned. System overcompensating. Creating feedback loops. "Ha," he muttered, more to himself than to Peter. "Sounds like a feedback loop. Probably something simple getting overcomplicated." He'd seen this exact problem last year with his truck. The transmission wouldn't engage because the cooling system was backing up pressure into the hydraulic lines. The onboard computer kept trying to fix the temperature problem, which made the hydraulic problem worse, which made the computer try harder, which made everything worse. Round and round. He'd spent 2 weeks listening to mechanics tell him about expensive repairs before he finally ignored them all, traced the actual flow of fluids and found a stuck valve. $30 part, 2 hours of work, problem solved. What was that? Tom looked up and nearly dropped his wrench. Standing in the doorway of the maintenance bay was the most intimidating figure he'd ever seen. She was tall, easily 7 feet, with skin that looked like it was made of living crystal. It caught the station lights and reflected them in rainbow patterns across the walls. She had 3 eyes arranged in a triangle on her face, and all 3 were focused on him with an intensity that made his mouth go dry. Behind her stood a group of aliens in formal uniforms, all looking exhausted and irritated. One of them, a Calthene with deep purple crystalline skin and 4 arms, stepped forward with a scowl. "Your Majesty, this is just a maintenance bay. This human is clearly busy with his own work. We shouldn't." "I asked him a question, Kelthrun," the tall woman said, her voice suddenly quiet but no less commanding. "Human, you said something about a feedback loop and something simple. Explain what you meant." Tom realized his mouth was hanging open and closed it quickly. Sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt anything important, Your Majesty. I was just working on this coffee machine and couldn't help overhearing your problem with the ship." "And?" she pressed, taking a step closer. Tom glanced at Peter, who looked terrified, then back at the Empress. Well, ma'am, it just sounds like something I dealt with before. My truck last year had a transmission problem. Wouldn't engage at all. Took it to 3 different mechanics, and they all told me about the complex computer systems and the fancy diagnostics. Said it would cost thousands to fix. The Empress's eyes narrowed. But it turned out the cooling system was backing up pressure into the hydraulic lines. Created a loop where the computer kept trying to fix the temperature, which messed up the hydraulics, which made the computer try harder, which made everything worse. Once I stopped listening to the diagnostic computer and just followed where the actual fluids were going, I found a stuck valve. Fixed it in an afternoon. The 4-armed engineer, Kelthron, made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a snort. With all due respect, human, a quantum drive system is infinitely more complex than your primitive vehicle's transmission. The mathematics alone require 17 years of study to understand. The quantum field interactions, the dimensional folding, the matter-energy conversion ratios. These are not things you fix with a wrench and some luck. Tom nodded slowly. I'm sure that's all true, sir. I don't know anything about quantum drives or dimensional folding. I just fix things that break on this station. Air filters, water recyclers, heaters, coffee machines. Basic stuff. Empress Solara studied him for a long moment. Her 3 eyes blinked one at a time, a gesture Tom found oddly unsettling. Then, to his complete shock, she smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who just made a decision that was probably going to make a lot of people uncomfortable. 28 engineers, she said softly. 28 specialists from across my empire and beyond. Calthene quantum theorists, Rixian field manipulators, Vorth energy masters. Every one of them has told me my ship cannot be fixed. Every one of them has shown me calculations and models proving it's impossible. She took another step closer, and Tom had to resist the urge to back away. You fixed a similar problem with your truck in an afternoon. Well, it was a much simpler, Tom started. If you're so good, Solara interrupted, her voice suddenly sharp again, fix my ship. Tom followed Empress Solara through the crystalline corridors of the flagship, his work boots squeaking on the polished floor. Behind him, Chief Engineer Kelthron walked with crossed arms and a deep frown. Peter had been left back at the station, looking relieved to escape whatever was about to happen. The ship was massive. Tom had seen it from the outside dozens of times over the past 3 weeks, but being inside was different. The walls seemed to glow from within, casting soft blue and purple light that shifted as they walked. Control panels lined every surface, covered in symbols he couldn't read. Crew members stopped to stare as the Empress passed, their eyes widening when they saw the human in dirty coveralls trailing behind her. Your Majesty, I must protest again, Kelthron said for what had to be the 5th time since leaving the station. This human has no training in quantum field theory. No understanding of dimensional mechanics. He fixes coffee machines. This is a waste of valuable time. Your 28 trained specialists have had 3 weeks, Solara replied without slowing down. They've accomplished nothing except telling me what can't be done. Perhaps it's time to try someone who doesn't know what's impossible. They descended deeper into the ship, taking a lift that moved sideways as much as it moved down. Tom's stomach lurched slightly. He'd never been comfortable with alien gravity systems. They finally stopped in front of a massive door that split open like a flower, revealing the engineering bay beyond. Tom stopped walking and just stared. The quantum drive chamber was enormous, easily the size of a warehouse. In the center floated a structure that hurt to look at directly. It seemed to exist in multiple places at once, shifting and shimmering like heat waves on a summer road. Energy conduits as thick as tree trunks ran from it in all directions, disappearing into the walls. The air itself felt different here, heavy and charged with something Tom couldn't name. Around the drive stood groups of alien engineers, at least 15 visible from where Tom stood. They all turned to look as the Empress entered, and their expressions ranged from curious to openly hostile. Tom recognized several species he'd seen around the station, but others were completely unfamiliar. "This is the human?" one of them asked, a tall being with 6 arms and skin like polished metal. "Your Majesty, surely you're not serious." "Deadly serious, Vexen," Solara replied. She gestured to Tom. "You all have 12 hours to observe and assist if he asks for help. If he fails, we proceed with abandoning the ship and transferring to a new flagship. If he succeeds, perhaps you'll all learn something." The engineers began talking at once, voices rising in protest. Tom ignored them and walked slowly toward the quantum drive. Up close, it was even more impressive and confusing. Display screens floated in midair around it, showing graphs and numbers that changed too fast to follow. Warning lights blinked in patterns across dozens of control panels. He pulled out his tablet, an old model he'd bought 5 years ago that was held together with electrical tape. It looked pathetic next to the advanced technology surrounding him, but it had his diagnostic software and notes from hundreds of repairs. He started taking pictures of the displays, trying to understand what he was looking at. "What are you doing?" Kelthron asked, appearing at his shoulder. "Those readings require specialized training to interpret." "I'm looking at patterns," Tom replied absently, snapping another picture. "Doesn't matter if I understand the numbers. I need to see what's changing and what's staying the same." He walked around the drive slowly, his tablet clicking away. The engineers watched him with expressions ranging from amusement to disgust. One of them, a short alien with purple fur, actually laughed out loud. "He's taking pictures like a tourist," the furry engineer said to his companion. "Next he'll ask us to pose for him." Tom ignored them. He'd learned long ago that half of being good at repairs was knowing when to tune out distractions. He completed his circle around the drive and started reviewing the pictures on his tablet, flipping between them quickly. "There," he muttered, stopping on 3 images. "See that?" "See what?" Kelthron asked, leaning over to look at the tiny screen. Tom pointed at a section of readings in the corner of each image. "These numbers here. In every picture they're climbing. Everything else is changing all over the place, but these 3 readings just keep going up. Slowly but steady. Those are the thermal pressure readings for the quantum stabilizer array," Kelthron explained with obvious patience. "They've been elevated since the failure began. We've accounted for that in our calculations." "Right, but why are they going up?" Tom asked. He zoomed in on the numbers. "What's causing the pressure to build?" "The quantum destabilization creates heat as a byproduct," another engineer explained, a Calthene woman with bright green crystalline skin. "It's a symptom of the larger problem, not the cause." Tom shook his head slowly. "See, that's what the mechanics told me about my truck. They said the heat was a symptom. But it turned out the heat was causing everything else. The system was trying to cool itself down, which triggered other systems, which created more heat, which made it try harder. Round and round." "This is nothing like your primitive truck," Kelthron said, his voice tight with frustration. "The quantum mathematics prove that the destabilization is occurring at the field level. The heat is merely a consequence." Tom looked up at the massive drive, then back at his tablet. He pulled up his notes from the truck repair, reading through his own simple observations. Then he looked at the pictures again, focusing on those climbing numbers. "Okay, here's what I think," he said finally. "You've got a pressure buildup somewhere in your cooling system. That pressure is forcing heat back into the quantum drive. The drive tries to compensate, which creates more heat, which increases the pressure, which creates more compensation. It's a feedback loop." The engineering bay went quiet. Several of the aliens exchanged glances. The furry engineer who'd laughed earlier stepped forward, his expression no longer amused. "Human, we've run complete diagnostic scans of every cooling system on this ship. The mathematical models show no blockages, no pressure irregularities, no system failures. What you're suggesting contradicts 17 separate analysis programs." Tom set down his tablet and pulled his toolkit from his belt. It was a simple canvas roll with basic tools, nothing fancy. He selected a small scanner he'd modified himself to detect pressure differentials in pipes and conduits. "Math is great," he said, walking toward one of the massive conduits connected to the drive. "I'm not saying it's wrong. But sometimes you need to follow the actual problem, not what the computer says the problem should be." He held his scanner against the conduit and watched the needle jump. Then he moved down a few feet and tested again. The needle jumped even higher. He continued along the conduit, testing every few feet, and the pattern became clear. The pressure was building as the coolant moved through the system, not decreasing like it should. "Something's blocking the flow," Tom said, more to himself than the others. "Not completely, but enough to create back pressure." "Impossible," Kelthron stated flatly. "The diagnostic systems would have detected any blockage." Tom kept moving along the conduit, following it across the engineering bay and toward a junction point where it split into 3 smaller pipes. His scanner went crazy as he approached, the needle pegging at maximum. "Right here," he said, tapping the junction. "This is where your problem starts." Empress Zilara had been watching silently from near the entrance. Now she approached, her footsteps echoing in the suddenly quiet bay. "Explain," she commanded. Tom pointed at the junction. "The coolant comes down this main line, right? Then it splits into 3 smaller lines that circle back to cool different parts of the drive. But something's restricting the flow right at this junction point. The coolant can't get through properly, so it backs up. That creates pressure in the main line, which forces heat back toward the drive instead of away from it. And this causes the quantum destabilization? Zalara asked. I think the quantum whatever it is fine, Tom replied. It's just too hot because the cooling system isn't working right. So the drive tries to protect itself by changing how it operates, which makes the computer systems try to compensate, which creates more changes, which creates more compensation. Everything's fighting itself instead of working together. Kelthron pulled out his own scanning device, far more advanced than Tom's simple pressure gauge. He ran it over the junction point, his 4 eyes widening as he read the results. There is a pressure irregularity, he admitted slowly. But the diagnostic systems show no blockage. The flow should be normal. Should be doesn't mean is, Tom said. He was already examining the junction point, looking for access panels. Sometimes the computer is wrong. Or sometimes there's something the computer can't see. Either way, we need to open this up and look inside. The green-skinned Calthene engineer gasped. You can't just open a primary coolant junction while the system is active. The pressure release alone could kill me. Yeah, I know, Tom interrupted. He'd found the access panel and was already working on the seals. Done this kind of thing before. You just need to bleed off the pressure slowly first. Anyone got a flow regulator valve I can borrow? Tom knelt beside the coolant junction with his borrowed tools spread out on the deck around him. Kelthron had reluctantly provided him with a flow regulator valve after Tom explained exactly what would happen if they didn't bleed the pressure carefully. The chief engineer now stood 3 steps back, watching with the kind of nervous energy of someone expecting an explosion. The other engineers had formed a loose circle around Tom's work area, some curious, others clearly waiting for him to fail. Tom ignored them all and focused on the task at hand. He'd done pressure bleeds 100 times before, though never on anything quite this important. Okay, connecting the regulator now, Tom said out loud, mostly for his own benefit. He threaded the valve onto the access port and slowly began opening it. A hiss of pressurized coolant escaped, glowing faintly blue in the dim light. The engineers tensed, but Tom kept his movements slow and steady. That's it, nice and easy. It took 20 minutes to bleed enough pressure to safely open the junction. Tom's knees ached from kneeling on the hard deck, and sweat dripped down his back despite the cool air. Finally, the pressure gauge read safe levels and he began removing the access panel. This is insane, muttered the furry purple engineer, whose name Tom had learned was Rothack. He's going to flood the entire engineering bay with quantum-charged coolant. Then maybe you should step back, Tom suggested without looking up. The last bolt came free and he carefully lifted the panel away. Inside the junction was a mess that made Tom let out a low whistle. 3 pipes met at a central chamber where the coolant was supposed to flow freely between them. But coating the inside of the chamber was a thick, crystalline buildup that had reduced the flow space by at least 60%. Well, there's your blockage, Tom said, pointing inside so the others could see. Kelthron leaned in, his face changing from skeptical to shocked. That's crystallized quantum residue. But that's impossible. The coolant is specifically formulated to prevent crystallization. Tom pulled out his tablet and took several pictures. Clearly not impossible, since there it is. What causes this stuff to form? The green-skinned engineer, whose name was Silthera, pushed forward to look. Quantum residue crystallizes when the coolant temperature exceeds operational parameters for extended periods. But our monitors would have alerted us to temperature spikes. Unless the temperature rose so gradually that it stayed just under your alert threshold, Tom said. He was already thinking through the problem. Like when my son's gaming console kept overheating. The fan was working, so the computer didn't think anything was wrong, but dust buildup meant it was running 5 degrees hotter than it should. Over months, that 5 degrees cooked the processor. He sat back on his heels and looked up at the massive quantum drive. How long has this ship been in active service without a full coolant system flush? Kelthron's face went through several shades of purple. 17 months. But the maintenance schedule doesn't call for a full flush until something goes wrong, Tom finished. Right. So for 17 months your coolant has been running just a little too hot. Not enough to trigger alarms, but enough to start forming this crud. It builds up slowly, which reduces flow, which makes the coolant run hotter, which forms more crud. Another feedback loop. Empress Zalara had moved closer during the conversation. Can you remove it? Tom examined the crystalline buildup carefully. It looked hard and brittle, fused to the metal walls of the junction. Not easily. This stuff is really stuck in there. Scraping it out would take hours and I might damage the pipes. Plus, even if I clean this junction, the crud is probably building up in other places too. So we're back where we started, Rodhack said with obvious satisfaction. The human found the blockage but can't fix it. Tom stood up, his knees popping, and walked over to where Kelthron stood. I need to see your safety protocol list for the coolant system. Why? Kelthron asked suspiciously. Because I'm betting you've got redundancies and automatic systems that are actually making this worse, Tom replied. Just pull it up. Kelthron produced a tablet and called up the protocols. Tom scrolled through the list, his frown deepening with each page. Okay, yeah, this is what I thought. You've got 17 different safety systems all trying to maintain coolant temperature. When one system detects a problem, it triggers the others, which all start compensating in different ways. Those systems are there to prevent exactly the kind of failure we're experiencing, Silthra protested. Except they're all fighting each other, Tom countered. He pointed at the screen. Look, this system tries to increase flow when temperature rises. But this one tries to decrease flow to reduce pressure. And this one tries to reroute coolant to alternate paths. They're all triggering at the same time, creating chaos instead of fixing anything. He handed the tablet back to Kelthron. I need you to disable protocols 7 through 23. The engineering bay erupted in protests. Multiple aliens started talking at once, their voices rising in pitch and volume. Kelthron's face went almost black with shock. Absolutely not, the chief engineer shouted over the noise. Those protocols protect the quantum drive from catastrophic failure. Disabling them would void every safety certification this ship has. Those protocols are strangling your ship, Tom shot back. Look, I'm not saying get rid of them forever. But right now, with the coolant system partially blocked, they're making everything worse. We need to shut them down, clear the blockage, and then turn them back on. Your Majesty, I cannot allow this. Kelthron turned to address Zalara directly. This human is suggesting we disable critical safety systems based on his experience with gaming consoles and trucks. It's reckless and dangerous. Empress Zalara looked at Tom for a long moment. Her 3 eyes blinked in that unsettling sequence again. Tom Wallace, if we disable these systems and something goes wrong, people could die. This ship could be destroyed. Are you confident in your assessment? Tom wiped his sweaty palms on his coveralls. His wife Linda always told him he had too much confidence for his own good, but this was different. This wasn't fixing a water heater in someone's basement. This was an Imperial flagship with hundreds of crew members. But he thought about that junction clogged with crystalline crud. He thought about all those safety systems fighting each other. He thought about his truck, his son's gaming console, the coffee machine from that morning. Different problems, same pattern. Yes, Your Majesty, he said firmly. I'm confident. Zalara smiled that unsettling smile again. Kelthron, disable the protocols. Your Majesty. That's an order, Chief Engineer. Kelthron's hands shook as he worked his tablet. This is being logged as a direct command from the Empress. I am officially protesting this action. He tapped the screen several times and somewhere in the ship, alarms began to sound. Protocols 7 through 23 are now disabled. Tom felt the change immediately. The quantum drive shimmer seemed to settle, becoming slightly less chaotic. The pressure readings on the nearby displays stopped jumping around quite so frantically. Okay, good. Now I need some supplies from the station, Tom said, pulling out his own tablet and making a list. Kelthron, can you send someone to grab these? Should only take 20 minutes. The chief engineer looked at the list and his expression became even more horrified. Magnetic shunts? Industrial solvent? Pressure release valves? These are maintenance supplies, not quantum drive components. Yep, Tom agreed cheerfully. That's kind of the point. Your fancy quantum components are great, but right now we need to work around the blockage, not try to fix it perfectly. We need to reroute the coolant flow temporarily while we dissolve that crud. Reroute the flow? There are no alternate paths. The system was designed for maximum efficiency. So we make an alternate path, Tom said. He was already walking around the engineering bay, examining other conduits and pipes. See, this is exactly like when my refrigerator's cooling line got blocked. Couldn't clear the blockage without taking the whole thing apart, so I added a bypass line. Worked for 3 years until I finally replaced the fridge. He stopped at a secondary conduit that ran parallel to the main coolant line. This pipe here, what does it carry? Silthra checked her tablet. That's a backup power conduit. It's rated for high-temperature energy transfer but is currently inactive. Perfect. We can use it as a temporary coolant bypass. Tom was already calculating angles and distances in his head. We run the coolant through here around the block junction and feed it back into the system downstream. The magnetic shunts will help redirect the flow, and the pressure release valves will keep everything stable. That conduit isn't rated for quantum-charged coolant, Rodhack objected. Doesn't need to be, not for a few hours, Tom replied. We're not looking for perfect, we're looking for good enough to stop the feedback loop. Tom stepped back from his work and wiped his hands on a rag that was already filthy beyond recognition. The bypass line he'd created looked absolutely ridiculous. Magnetic shunts from the station's storage room held coolant pipes in place at odd angles. Industrial-grade solvent dripped slowly into the block junction through a jury-rigged feeder system. Pressure release valves that normally belonged on water recyclers now dotted the makeshift coolant route like mechanical mushrooms. The whole thing was held together with reinforced clamps, heat-resistant tape, and what his daughter Nina would call dad engineering. It looked nothing like the sleek, crystalline technology of the rest of the ship. It looked like exactly what it was, a maintenance worker's emergency fix using whatever materials were available. Kelthron stood beside the bypass line with all four arms crossed, staring at Tom's work with an expression somewhere between horror and fascination. The other engineers had gathered around, forming a silent crowd that pressed in from all sides. "This is your solution?" Kelthron finally asked. "This collection of mismatched parts and primitive components?" "Yep," Tom replied, checking each connection one more time. "The solvent will dissolve the crystalline buildup in the main junction over the next few hours. Meanwhile, the bypass gives the coolant an alternate route. Once the crud is cleared, you can remove all this and go back to the original system." "Easy. Easy," Rodhack repeated, his purple fur bristling. "Human, this bypass violates at least 30 different engineering standards. The pressure ratios are completely unbalanced. The flow dynamics are chaotic at best. And you've used components that were never designed to interact with quantum-charged coolant." Tom shrugged. "True, but it should work anyway. The pressure ratios don't need to be perfect, they just need to be good enough. The flow dynamics are chaotic, yeah, but chaos is better than a complete blockage. And the components will hold up fine for the few hours we need them to." Silthra pulled up calculations on her tablet, her green crystalline fingers moving rapidly. "According to my models, if we activate the drive with this bypass in place, there's a 63% chance of cascade failure within the first 30 seconds. Your models also said the blockage was impossible," Tom pointed out gently. "Maybe the models aren't accounting for something." "The models are based on decades of quantum engineering research," Kelthron said stiffly. "They've been proven across thousands of ships and millions of light-years of travel." "I'm sure they're great for normal situations," Tom agreed. "But this isn't a normal situation. You've got a clogged system, disabled safety protocols, and a bypass made from spare parts. The models probably don't have any data for something this weird." He walked over to the main control panel, where a Calthene technician had been monitoring the drive status. "What are the pressure readings showing now?" The technician checked his screens. "The main coolant line pressure has dropped by 18% since you installed the bypass. Temperature readings in the quantum matrix are down by 4 degrees. "See," Tom said, pointing at the screens. "It's already working. The bypass is taking some of the load off the block junction. Give it a few more minutes and the numbers will keep improving." Empress Zilara had been observing from a raised platform near the entrance to the engineering bay. Now she descended the steps and approached Tom's bypass line, examining it closely. Her 3 eyes scanned every connection, every valve, every piece of improvised equipment. "Chief Engineer Kelthron," she said without taking her eyes off the bypass, "in your professional opinion, what will happen when we attempt to activate the quantum drive?" Kelthron's expression went through several complicated emotions before settling on resigned honesty. "Your Majesty, I believe there will be a catastrophic failure. The stress on the jury-rigged components will cause ruptures. Quantum-charged coolant will flood the engineering bay. The drive itself may suffer irreparable damage. And there is a non-zero chance of a containment breach that could destroy the entire ship." The engineering bay went completely silent. Tom felt his stomach drop. When Kelthron put it that way, the bypass line did look pretty scary. He thought about Linda and the kids back on the colony. He thought about the hundreds of crew members on this ship. Was he really that confident in his work? He looked at the bypass again, checking each connection with his eyes. The magnetic shunts were rated for twice the pressure they'd be handling. The solvent feeder was working exactly as designed. The pressure release valves had redundant fail-safes. It wasn't pretty, but it was solid. "I disagree," Tom said quietly. Zilara turned to face him. "Explain." "Everything Kelthron said could happen, sure," Tom admitted. "But it won't. The components aren't pretty, but they're strong. I didn't just slap this together randomly. Each piece serves a purpose and they're all working together. He pointed at the pressure readings. Look at the numbers. They're moving in the right direction. The system is stabilizing. Numbers can be deceiving, Silthra interjected. We've been watching numbers for 3 weeks while the ship slowly died. That's because you were watching the wrong numbers, Tom replied. You were focused on the quantum field readings and the computer diagnostics. But the real problem was right here in the basic cooling system. Sometimes the simplest explanation is the right one. Empress Zalara studied Tom's face for a long moment. He met her gaze as steadily as he could, trying to project a confidence he didn't entirely feel. This was so far outside his usual work. He fixed air filters and coffee machines. He helped neighbors with their plumbing. He wasn't qualified to work on Imperial flagships. But then again, 28 qualified engineers hadn't been able to fix it either. Your Majesty, I strongly advise against this test, Kelthron said. If the human is wrong, we could lose the ship and everyone on it. We should evacuate non-essential personnel first. Set up containment fields. Establish emergency protocols. How long would that take? Zalara asked. At least 6 hours, possibly more. And in 6 hours, what happens to the quantum drive in its current state? Kelthron checked his readings and his face fell. The temperature will continue to rise. Even with the bypass reducing pressure, the crystalline buildup is still blocking most of the flow. Within 6 hours, we'll reach critical temperature levels. So we either test the drive now with the bypass in place, or we wait until the drive is too damaged to save, Zalara summarized. Those are our options. Yes, Your Majesty. The Empress looked around the engineering bay at all the assembled engineers. Then she looked at Tom, standing there in his stained coveralls with grease under his fingernails and exhaustion in his eyes. Tom Wallace, she said formally, you've spent 5 hours working on my ship. You've bypassed safety protocols, used unauthorized components and violated numerous engineering standards. Your solution looks like something assembled in a scrapyard. She paused and a slight smile crossed her face. I'm going to trust it. Activate the drive. The engineering bay erupted in shocked protests, but Zalara held up one hand and silence fell immediately. Kelthron looked like he might physically stop her, but instead he just bowed his head in submission. As you command, Your Majesty, he said heavily. But I want it noted that I am opposed to this action. So noted, Zalara replied. Proceed. Tom's heart was hammering so hard he could hear it in his ears. This was really happening. They were going to test the drive with his improvised fix in place. He suddenly wished he'd double-checked every connection one more time. Or triple-checked. Maybe quadruple-checked. Kelthron moved to the main control panel with slow, deliberate movements. His fingers hovered over the activation sequence. Initiating quantum drive startup sequence, he announced. May the ancestors forgive us. He pressed the controls. For 3 long seconds nothing happened. The quantum drive sat there in its shimmer of displaced space, looking exactly as it had for the past 3 weeks. Dead and dark. Then, with a sound like wind chimes mixed with distant thunder, the drive began to wake up. The shimmer intensified, colors swirling through it in patterns that made Tom's eyes water. Energy started flowing through the massive conduits, visible as glowing streams of light. The whole engineering bay hummed with power. Tom watched his bypass line tensely. The coolant started flowing through it, glowing faintly blue as it moved. The magnetic shunts held firm. The pressure release valves opened and closed in sequence, managing the flow automatically. Everything was working exactly as he'd planned. The pressure readings on the displays began dropping rapidly. The temperature numbers followed, falling degree by degree. The chaotic fluctuations that had plagued the system for weeks began to smooth out into steady, predictable patterns. Quantum field stabilization at 40%, the monitoring technician called out, his voice shocked. 50%. 60%. The drive shimmer was becoming more regular now, pulsing in a steady rhythm that reminded Tom of a heartbeat. The colors settled into a stable blue-green pattern that was actually beautiful to watch. 70% stabilization. Temperature within normal operational range. Pressure normalized across all systems. Kelthron was staring at his own tablet, his face cycling through several shades of purple and blue. This is impossible, he whispered. The efficiency readings are better than they were before the malfunction. We're running at 112% of baseline. Tom allowed himself a small smile. That's because the safety protocols were creating drag on the system. Like having your parking brake on while you drive. Once we cleared the blockage and let the coolant flow properly, everything settled into its natural rhythm. The quantum drive was fully active now, humming with restrained power. Every display showed green indicators. Every reading was stable. The ship that had been dead in space for 3 weeks was alive again. Empress Zalara walked up to Tom and placed one crystalline hand on his shoulder. Her touch was cool and smooth like polished stone. "You did it," she said simply. The engineering bay erupted in chaos. Engineers who had been predicting disaster moments ago were now crowding around their displays, checking and rechecking readings that refused to lie. The quantum drive pulsed with steady power, its energy flowing through the ship's systems like blood through a healthy body. For the first time in 3 weeks, the Calthene flagship was whole again. Tom felt his legs go weak with relief. He'd been more scared than he'd let on, and now that it was over, the tension drained out of him all at once. He leaned against a support pillar and let out a long breath. "Unbelievable," Rodhack was saying, his purple fur standing on end. "The temperature efficiency is actually better than factory specifications. How is that possible?" Silthra was running calculations furiously on her tablet. The bypass created an alternate flow pattern that reduced turbulence in the system. And removing those redundant safety protocols eliminated the constant micro-adjustments that were creating drag. "It's crude, but it's actually more efficient than our original design." Kelthrun stood alone near the main control panel, staring at the quantum drive with an expression Tom couldn't quite read. The chief engineer's forearms hung limply at his sides, and his crystalline skin had turned a pale shade of gray. Empress Zalara released Tom's shoulder and turned to address the assembled engineers. "Let this be a lesson to all of you," she said, her voice carrying easily through the bay. "Knowledge and training are valuable, but they can also blind you to simple solutions. Sometimes the most complex problems need the simplest fixes." She gestured toward Tom. This human saw what 28 specialists missed because he wasn't looking at mathematics and models. He was looking at the actual problem in front of him. That is a skill worth more than 1,000 degrees. Tom felt his face getting hot. He wasn't used to being praised in front of crowds, especially not by alien empresses. "I just did what made sense, Your Majesty. Anyone could have figured it out if they'd stopped overthinking it." "But they didn't," Zalara replied. "You did." She turned to face him fully, all 3 eyes focused on his face. "Tom Wallace, I would like to offer you a position as Chief Engineer of the Imperial Fleet. Your salary would be substantial. You would have access to technology most humans can only dream of. Your family would want for nothing." The engineering bay went silent again. Tom saw several of the alien engineers' faces shift from celebration to shock. Kelthrun looked like he'd been struck. Tom thought about it for maybe 3 seconds. A fortune. Advanced technology. Prestige beyond anything a maintenance worker could normally achieve. It was tempting, he couldn't deny that. The money alone would set up his kids for life. Then he thought about missing Nina's basketball games. About not being there when his son Kyle needed help with his school projects. About Linda coming home to an empty house after her long days of teaching. About the neighbors who depended on him to fix their heaters when winter came. "That's incredibly generous, Your Majesty," Tom said carefully. "And I'm honored, really. But I'm going to have to decline." Zalara's eyes blinked in that unsettling sequence. "You're refusing? May I ask why?" "I've got a life back on the colony," Tom explained. "Nina has a basketball tournament next week that she's been practicing for all month. Kyle's science fair is in 3 weeks, and we're building a solar collector together. My wife Linda just started a new curriculum at school that she's excited about. And honestly, I've got a garage project that's half finished, and it's been driving me crazy." He gestured around the engineering bay. "This was interesting, don't get me wrong. And I'm glad I could help. But this isn't my world. I fix coffee machines and air filters. That's what I'm good at, and that's what makes me happy." For a moment, Tom worried he'd offended her. But then Zalara threw back her head and laughed. It was a sound like crystal bells, clear and surprisingly warm. "A man who knows what he wants and isn't swayed by wealth or power," she said. "Your empire is fortunate to have you, Tom Wallace, even if they don't know it." She paused, considering. "What if I asked you to consult? Not full-time but occasionally. When we encounter problems that traditional approaches can't solve." Tom thought about that. "Maybe. If it doesn't interfere with my family time. And if you pay for my travel." "Done," Zalara agreed immediately. "And I have one more request. Would you write a maintenance guide for my engineers? Not a technical manual full of mathematics, but a practical guide. How to recognize problems. How to troubleshoot using common sense. The kind of knowledge you use every day." That made Tom smile. "Sure, I can do that. Might take me a few weeks, but I can put something together." "Excellent." Zalara turned to Kelthron, who had been standing silently through the entire exchange. Chief Engineer, I believe you have something to say to Tom Wallace. Kelthron approached slowly, his gray skin color returning to its normal purple shade. He stopped in front of Tom and to Tom's surprise bowed deeply. Tom Wallace, I owe you an apology, Kelthron said formally. I dismissed you because of your lack of formal training. I assumed that education and credentials were more important than practical experience. I was wrong. He straightened up, meeting Tom's eyes. Would you be willing to teach me? Not just the specific repairs you made today, but your entire approach to problem solving. Tom felt uncomfortable with all the formality. Sure, yeah, of course. It's not complicated, really. You just have to remember that machines are machines, whether they're coffee dispensers or quantum drives. They all follow the same basic principles. Energy goes in, work comes out, and when something breaks, it's usually something simple that's wrong. Simple, Kelthron repeated as if tasting the word. We make everything so complex. Layers of protocols and safety systems and redundant backups. Perhaps we've forgotten that sometimes simple is better. Silthra joined them, her green skin gleaming in the drive's light. Tom Wallace, I would also like to learn from you. My models failed today because they couldn't account for simple mechanical blockage. That's a flaw in my thinking that needs correcting. Other engineers began approaching, asking questions, requesting advice. Tom found himself surrounded by some of the most educated minds in the galaxy, all wanting to learn from a maintenance worker who'd never finished college. It was surreal and humbling and a little overwhelming. Finally, Empress Zalara rescued him. Enough. Tom Wallace has work to return to, and you all have much to think about. Give him space. The engineers backed off reluctantly, though several pressed tablets into Tom's hands with their contact information. Tom pocketed them all, making mental notes to actually respond. These folks had been kind to him once they'd gotten over their pride. Zalara walked Tom back through the crystalline corridors toward the docking bay. Your bypass will need to be replaced eventually, she said. But Kelthron estimates it will work perfectly well for several months. That gives us time to properly clean the entire coolant system and redesign some of the safety protocols. Good, Tom said. And make sure someone checks the other ships in your fleet. If this one had crystalline buildup, others probably do too. Might want to update your maintenance schedules. Already being arranged, Zalara assured him. They reached the airlock connecting to the station. Thank you, Tom Wallace. You've done more than fix my ship. You've reminded my engineers why they became engineers in the first place. Not to show off their knowledge, but to solve problems. Tom shook her hand, which felt strange given that she had crystalline skin, but the gesture seemed to please her. Just doing what needed doing, Your Majesty. Good luck with everything. He crossed back into the station, and the airlock sealed behind him with a hiss. The familiar corridors felt almost too normal after the elegant alien ship. Tom made his way back to the maintenance bay where this whole adventure had started. The coffee machine sat exactly where he'd left it, still half disassembled. Peter was nowhere to be seen, probably off on another task. Tom settled down in front of the machine and picked up his tools. Right, where were we? He muttered to himself. The pressure valve. He'd been working on the pressure valve when the Empress had interrupted him. He made the final adjustments, tested the flow, and reassembled the housing. 10 minutes later, the machine hummed to life and dispensed a perfect cup of coffee. Tom took a sip and smiled. Still had it. His communicator buzzed. He pulled it out and saw a message from Linda. Nina says you promised to help with her math homework tonight. Something about fractions. Don't be late. Tom checked the time and winced. He'd been on the flagship for almost 8 hours. The family would be sitting down for dinner soon. On my way, he typed back. Just fixed something interesting. Tell you about it later. He cleaned his tools and stored them in his locker, then headed for the transport shuttle that would take him down to the colony. As he walked, he passed other station workers who nodded in greeting. None of them knew what he'd just done. They saw a maintenance worker in dirty coveralls, same as always. That was fine with Tom. He didn't need recognition. He'd fixed a problem, learned some interesting things about alien technology, and now he was going home to his family. Perfect day, really. The shuttle ride down to the colony took 20 minutes. Tom spent it making notes for the maintenance guide he'd promised Zalara. Keep it simple. Focus on practical troubleshooting. Remind people to look at the actual problem, not what they think the problem should be. Basic stuff, but apparently not as basic as he'd thought. He arrived home to find the house warm and smelling like Linda's famous chicken stir-fry. Nina and Kyle were setting the table, arguing about whose turn it was to take out the garbage. Normal, wonderful chaos. Dad. Kyle ran up and grabbed his hand. You're late. Mom said you were fixing something important. Fixed a spaceship, Tom said, ruffling his son's hair. But nothing as important as helping you with that solar collector. Nina looked up from the plates she was arranging. Really? A spaceship? That's so cool. What was wrong with it? Clogged coolant line, Tom said, washing his hands at the sink. Pretty standard stuff, really? Linda emerged from the kitchen carrying the stir-fry. She kissed Tom's cheek and gave him a knowing look. Standard stuff. Right. The kind that keeps you 8 hours past your shift. It was interesting, Tom admitted. I'll tell you about it after dinner. But right now, I heard something about fractions that need explaining. They sat down to eat, and Tom felt the tension of the day finally drain away completely. This was what mattered. Family dinners. Homework help. His son's science projects and his daughter's basketball games. The big things were made up of small moments like these. After dinner, he helped Nina with her fractions, explaining them using pizza slices and basketball quarters until she got it. Then he and Kyle spent an hour in the garage working on the solar collector, connecting wires and testing voltage. Normal dad stuff. Later, after the kids were in bed, he told Linda the whole story. She listened with wide eyes, occasionally shaking her head. Only you, she said when he finished, could treat an Imperial flagship like a broken truck. A machine's a machine, Tom replied with a shrug. And they offered you how much money? A lot. But I like it here. Linda kissed him properly this time. Good answer. Tom's communicator buzzed again. He glanced at it and saw messages from several of the alien engineers, asking questions about troubleshooting approaches. Word was apparently spreading fast. Over the next few days, more messages came. Engineers from other ships. Scientists from research stations. Even a few government officials curious about human practical problem-solving methods. Tom answered what he could between fixing the station's heating system and helping a neighbor install new plumbing. A week later, Kelthron sent him a video message. The Calthene chief engineer stood in front of a classroom full of young engineering students. Today we begin a new course, Kelthron was saying. Practical problem solving, learning from human methods. Our guest instructor is Tom Wallace, though he's joining us remotely due to his daughter's basketball tournament. Tom laughed. Word was definitely spreading. Humans didn't just have advanced knowledge or powerful technology. They had something the galaxy was starting to realize it needed. Common sense, practical wisdom, and the ability to look at a problem without overthinking it. His communicator buzzed yet again. Another request for consultation. Tom typed a quick reply, then set the device aside. Nina's game was starting in an hour, and he promised to be there early. Some things, after all, were more important than fixing spaceships.